there, beautiful souls. I wanted to introduce you to a framework that has been really supportive to me in my life, and in particular in my intimate relationships. And when I'm beginning to form an attraction or connection with someone, this framework has really supported me in being able to lay the foundations for something healthy and actually really nourishing, rather than those kind of murky areas and murky lines that can get crossed in the beginning and that can lead to sort of ultimately something just falling apart or falling into an unhealthy pattern or patterns. So this framework is called RBDSM plus AF, and there's probably other pluses you can add in there, but I will share more in a minute. So although this framework has stemmed out of sex positive spaces, kink spaces, tantric spaces, it's actually a framework that can be adapted for every kind of relationship in your life. And I've known people who have been in business relationships to have this conversation and to weave this framework into their relationship dynamic. And it has been really supportive in order to lay foundations of clarity. And that really just helps everyone kind of know where they're at and what they need to do going forward in order to stay in integrity and to maintain healthy dynamics. So although bringing something like this framework up in the beginning of an intimate connection may feel edgy, ultimately it creates a foundation of much deeper safety and trust, which allows your connection to be way more fulfilling, way more satisfying, and way more pleasurable. It also prevents assumptions and invites a language of curiosity, consent, and care. It creates a space where both partners are leaning into vulnerability, and this ultimately also leads to deeper connection. And I'm sure most of you will agree that that is what we are after: deeper, more healthy, more sustainable, and more clear connections, because there is a lot of murky water out there. So let's jump into it. R stands for relationship status. And I'll give you an example of how you might want to use this. So for example, we take turns usually when we do this framework. So I'll go and then the next person will go, maybe then they'll go, then you go, whatever feels right in the moment. But if I was talking about my relationship status, I might say, right now I'm single and I'm really calling in a life partner. However, I am open to connections that feel really sacred and supportive, and I'm open to connections where I feel like we are able to enter into depth together. And then the other person might say something like, wow, thank you so much for sharing what you've just shared. So for me right now, I'm really not available for relationships. I've just come out of a long-term relationship and I really feel like I'm in a process of needing to just be free and find myself again. However, I'm also open to deep, meaningful connections, and I would be really delighted and honored to explore that with you if it's something you're open to. You can already see there how having this kind of conversation just brings a clarity to what it is you are connecting on. And, for the person who's calling in a relationship, they might have been hoping or, building a fantasy around this person, that maybe they're someone who they can enter into that with. And of course, by laying this on the table, their fantasy might dissolve. However, they get a much clearer and truer reality check, which allows them to then make a decision about whether they want to go forward with a connection and meet that other person where they are able to meet them. So that's our relationship status. So the next one is B, boundaries. Boundaries, of course, are all about listening and honoring what it is that we are available for and not available for. So I might say, in relation to boundaries, right now I am really open to having loving connection. I'd love to kiss you, but I'm not really available for anything more sexual at this point in time. And the other person might say something like, I don't have any boundaries. Which is something I've heard quite a lot, to be honest. And I would say that that's something that's a little bit misleading, because I believe all of us have boundaries, and it's important to actually learn to recognize what our boundaries are. So perhaps you might kind of ask them a question like, well, how would you feel if I pulled your hair and spat on you right now or something crazy, something that's quite out there. and they might be like, actually, no, I'm not into that right now. So, you know, sometimes it's important as we, you know, develop a language around these things to pry open a little bit further. As responsible adults, as responsible people who are entering into conscious intimacy, it's really important to like not just, you know, pick up what you're hearing with your ears, but also to read a bit between the lines and see if you can get curious, like find out, like, hang on a second, what is this person's boundaries? Like maybe they haven't really expressed that very clearly, and if you're not clear, then like how can you respect their boundaries? You know, if they're not clear, how can you respect their boundaries? So it's a really important one to kind of like dive into a little bit deeper and like learn how to negotiate, because boundaries are something that a lot of people struggle to actually communicate or struggle to even know how to express. So the next piece in the puzzle is desires, and this of course can be super juicy, super playful, super fun. But again, you can use this in like a broader context. Like for example, you could say, I am really into kink and I love being tied up. You know, that's one of my favorite things. Or you could say something like, I love playing with fire and ice. But in this moment, my desires are actually much more simple. I would just really love to hug, connect, cuddle, and like see where it goes and, you know, play from there. So, you know, desires can both also be a broader spectrum, or they can be a bit more like condensed, you know, into what you actually want to do in the moment. And yeah, and again, you can have that conversation. It can also be like a back and forth, and, you know, just invite in like what is true for you in that moment with this person. That's what I would really invite. You know, you may feel comfortable going into the bigger picture of your desires in life, but, you know, again, I find that every time I've had this conversation, it evolves in different ways, and it can also be beautiful just to see what naturally wants to be shared at that time. So then the next part is S, sexual health. So this is one of those parts that you probably wouldn't want to have in a conversation with your business partner. But sexual health is such an important thing to bring to the table, especially when you're exploring intimacy with someone for the first time. And, you know, it's so helpful to be able to have this framework to bring it into the picture, because without these frameworks, you know, it can feel really challenging sometimes to bring these conversations up. So that's why, you know, this kind of framework creates a container of safety around your connection. And obviously you can share what your sexual health is, the last time you got tested, and anything else that comes to mind around that. You might want to talk about protection and how you do or don't like to use it, etc., etc. But it's something that is such an important piece to include in this puzzle of dissolving these unhealthy patterns around intimacy. So next is M, meaning of connection. And this is a really beautiful one to connect to, because this is really all about our intention for being together, our intention for connecting on whatever level that is. And again, if you were to bring this into like a business partnership, you know, it's really important to kind of think about like, why are we here? Like, why are we really here? Like, is it because, you know, I'm here to be of service in the world and I love to be of service in this way? And does that align with my business partner? You know, that's a really important thing to find out. So when it comes to intimacy, M can really be all about, you know, I'm here because I really want to experience some pleasure. I have been starved of pleasure recently, and I would love to experience some pleasure with you. Or it could be something like, you know, for me, intimacy means a lot to me, and the fact we're sharing this connection means a lot. So, you know, for me, it wouldn't work if you were just going to disappear tomorrow. I would need to know that you actually are invested in our relationship on whatever level that wants to expand into. So M really asks, what does this connection mean to me, and what does it mean to you? Are we friends exploring pleasure together? Are we lovers who are considering taking this a step deeper? You know, it really helps to just clarify the playing field, like where you are and where you are intending to go, and where you would like to go, and to see again whether that aligns with your partner. And then we are on to A, aftercare, another super potent and important piece to this puzzle. So aftercare, it's really like, as it says on the tin, you know, but like, again, this is not something we're really used to asking for a lot of the time in connection. You know, for example, I've used this in the past where I've kind of realized that for me, like in the past, what was really important to me was to be able to have a follow-up conversation and connection that felt consistent, you know, that I wasn't going to share this level of depth and intimacy with someone and then they were just going to disappear energetically from me. So I would, in that context, have said, you know, like, so for me, aftercare would look like, you know, continuing to stay energetically connected over the coming week or so, maybe having a call in the next few days. What wouldn't really be good for me is if you just stopped messaging me or you became avoidant with me, because that's something that's really triggered me in the past. So, you know, that's really owning your kind of triggers, sharing with the other person what's important to you, and like creating kind of a way forward together that allows you, again, drop into the connection with more depth and safety. And then finally, we're on to F, fears, which is, again, you know, this can bring so much up, and really it can be such a profound thing to open up because, you know, for example, I might say, I'm afraid of getting attached to you. Or someone else might say, I'm afraid of hurting you. I'm afraid that if we share this night together, it's going to create complexity in our relationship dynamic, and I don't want to open up that can of worms without kind of knowing how we're going to navigate that. So these are just some examples, but I think you can get the essence of what fear is really all about. And again, it's a very vulnerable thing to share our fears with someone in this way, which is why this conversation really can open up such depth of connection, and it really lays the foundation for something so much richer to evolve. And to close this video, I'm just going to give you some examples of when you might want to bring this up in a conversation. It can literally be, you know, you start making eyes with someone and maybe you notice like their hands drift over to your leg, and there's like a real sense of like, okay, there's a flirtation. There's something more going on here than just, you know, a hello or like whatever it is. And you might say, look, like I can tell that there's something here between us that wants to be explored, and I'm wondering if you'd be open to having a conversation with me. It's something I learned. It's like a tantric, like sex positive framework. It's called RBDSMAF. And then you share with them the different acronyms and see if they're open to it. And that's one example of how you might bring this up in a conversation. You know, it might also be later in the game when you've already explored intimately with someone, but you actually really want to bring some clarity because you're feeling like anxious, or, you know, some of these kind of attachment kind of dynamics might be arising between you, and you're like, you know what, I really want to bring clarity to this. So it's really supportive on multiple levels, in multiple types of contexts, and with multiple types of relationships. So I hope this blesses you with much healthier dynamics going forward. And I really encourage you to lean into the edge of bringing this forward, because I guarantee you, every single time I've brought it forward in my own experience, it has only created deeper intimacy and deeper connection. And if someone's not open to having this kind of conversation, you know, it's probably going to tell you pretty quickly that they're not necessarily the kind of person you want to go forward with anyway, you know, or maybe you do, but that's up to you. And it'll one way or the other highlight what is important and where you want to go from there. So happy journeying, and may this information, may this wisdom bring you a beautiful insight and beautiful connections going forward. Big love to you all.